All right, we'll be taking a very short break. Before the break,
this is when we take a look.
Talk economy.
Definitely.
We're done with politics now. We now take a look at how Nigeria's economy performed during the last decade. Indeed, there were many twists and turns, if you ask me, marked by policies and decisions, as well as projections and outcomes. However, one of the watershed moments was recorded on April the 6th, 2014, when Nigeria was actually announced to have overtaken South Africa as Africa's largest economy. Let's talk about data from the National Bureau of Statistics. It shows a rebasing calculation almost double the country's gross domestic product to more than $500 billion. Today is Saturday, the 16th of February, a day set aside for the 2019 presidential and National Assembly elections. But few hours to the day, no one was certain whether or not the elections would hold, owing to logistics complained from many quarters. But after an emergency meeting which lasted over 4 hours among INEC commissioners, confirmation came.
The Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, met on Friday, 15th February 2019, and reviewed its preparations for the 2019 general elections, scheduled for Saturday, 16th February 2019, and Saturday, 5th March 2019. Following a careful review of the implementation of its logistics and operational plan, and the determination to conduct free, fair, and credible elections, the Commission came to the conclusion that proceeding with the election as scheduled is no longer feasible. Consequently, the Commission has decided to reschedule the Presidential and National Assembly elections to Saturday, 23rd February 2019. Furthermore, the Governorship, State House of Assembly, and Federal Capital Territory Area Council elections are rescheduled to Saturday, 9th March 2019. This will afford the Commission the opportunity to address identified challenges in order to maintain the quality of our elections. This was a difficult decision for the Commission to take, but necessary for the successful delivery of elections and the consolidation of our democracy.
Now, the electoral body is aware that this piece of news, which was broken at about 3 a.m. here at the INEC headquarters, would not go down well with many Nigerians, and they have appealed for better understanding. From the INEC headquarters, Gloria Umezuke, Channels Television News.
It's the first Democracy Day celebration on the new date of June the 12th, with government officials, politicians and heads of government from across the globe witnessing the occasion. President Muhammadu Buhari mounts the podium to deliver his inaugural speech for a second time as president.
The principal thrust of this new administration is to consolidate on the achievements of the last 4 years, correct the lapses inevitable in all human endeavors, and tackle the new challenges the country is faced with, and chart a bold plan for transforming Nigeria.
A civil society activist, while applauding the president's ambition to reduce poverty, laments the lack of strategies towards achieving it.
One other area that resonated with me very well in this speech is the ambition to lift 100 million Nigerians out of poverty in 10 years. You know, that resonates with me. And the speech is also a little bit short on strategy.
Some lawmakers, however, give kudos to the president, especially for the political will to move Democracy Day from May the 29th to June 12th.
The speech of Mr. President today was very deep in thought, and as well very futuristic and very ambitious in nature.
Immortalizing the icon of the June 12 struggle is something that is also very crucial. that MKO Abiola, all these years, has not been, immortalized.
On the part of the Director General of We Believe, a civil society group, she believes the president's speech has raised the hopes of Nigerians for a better tomorrow.
I think Mr. President has got various plans to alleviate poverty and make a living for the average person convenient.
Although it's the first time Democracy Day is being observed outside the traditional date of May the 29th, the essence of the event still remains the same for the nation and its citizens.
Thank you very much for staying with us. This is 2019 review of a decade, and we have been looking at topics from 2010 till date 2019, and we're done with politics.
Definitely.
So we'll be delving into economy, and we have our guests in the studio right here in Lagos. So give us, a review and take a look at how it's been for one decade.
Definitely. Don't forget, it's the program 2019, end of a decade. And it's been a long ride. It's been a long journey for Nigeria. So let's meet our guests. It's a full house. Definitely. Economy is big deal. So let's start from my extreme left. We have Mr. Bismarck Rewane, who is the CEO of Financial Derivatives and a member of the Economic Advisory Council. We also have Mr. Marcel Okeke, just right next to him, who is an economist as well as he's a former chief economist for Zenith Bank, and Dr. Biodun Adedipe, also an economist. We might feel a bit overwhelmed, but we'll find a way around this.
We'll find a way, but it's money we'll be talking about.
Definitely. So let's show you this report, and when we come back, we'll talk about some of these issues. Don't forget, you can join the conversation on social media. The hashtag to use is Decade in Review. Tweet at us at Channels TV, and we'll be sure to take your messages. Watch this.
With a population of almost 170 million people, Nigeria has been growing as a destination for foreign investors owing to the size of its consumer market, increasingly sophisticated capital market, e-commerce, and Nollywood film industry.
Krista, I can't visit you anymore.
With this growing attention, it has become necessary to accurately calculate Nigeria's statistics, including its gross domestic products, GDP. Until now, the GDP estimate had been based on a one base year of 1990, which means the current GDP is not being calculated based on the current price of goods and services. But now, using a base year of 2010, Nigeria's GDP has more than doubled.
Nominal GDP in 2010 was revised from 33.9 trillion to 54.2 trillion. We are estimating that it is revised from 42.3 trillion in 2013 to 80.3 trillion, an increase of 89.22% for 2013.
Post-rebasing, Nigeria overtakes South Africa.
Nigeria has moved to the largest economy, to be the largest economy by GDP size in Africa, and has moved to be the 26th largest economy in the world, moving 10 positions up. On a per capita basis, Nigeria is number 121 in the world.
The figures show an improved and change in economic structure.
This is not an opening for us to go and borrow more. No, we will remain prudent. We are not going to borrow more. We still have to look at things like debt service to revenue.
The right policies are also necessary to achieve a strong economy.
Economic policy can be better and more correctly targeted based on the updated information than it could have been using the outdated information. Equally, this new information is also significant for us as development partners in improving our country diagnostics and sharpening our interventions.
This historic rebasing exercise has shown the strength and weakness of the economy, giving policymakers an idea of where and what to focus on when making decisions. For many, this new status can only be appreciated when it begins to translate into income earning power for a Nigerian.
Welcome back. This is still 2019, end of a decade. Remember that you can also follow us on social media, and let's get your reaction. The hashtag is Decade in Review.
Definitely.
So please, let's get in your reactions. From that last report we played, we'll start from Mr. Bismarck Rewane, the CEO of Financial Derivatives Company. 7 years down the line, that fuel subsidy was removed back in 2012. Should we have allowed that happen, looking at it now in 2019?
I think that it's not whether to remove the subsidy at the point in time. It is to deregulate the market and ensure that market forces determine the equilibrium price for the commodity. What we did was to try and fix a price without changing the market structure. And what happens is that under a static equilibrium basis, you will get equilibrium at that point, but you will immediately after, you'll go into disequilibrium. And markets have a way of correcting themselves. So the answer to your question is that we shouldn't have allowed that opportunity get by without allowing the markets to determine the price. In other words, that there are times when the price of petrol will actually reduce, and there are times when it will increase, but it cannot be static. Static equilibrium causes distortions.
So that proposed removal, which was rejected, and the government stepped back, what should have actually happened? I mean, it sounds like you're saying that shouldn't have been the only thing the government should have proposed. There should have been other things to follow. So what should they have been?
No, you see, the market structure is different from the price. Once you change the market structure, the price will emerge. What we tried to do was to fix a price, and then when there was a protest, we balked, and then we fixed another price. Price fixing doesn't work. It is price flexibility that works to ensure that the aggregate demand is equal to the aggregate supply. If not, you create gaps in the system.
So, Mr. Okike, 7 years down the line, how far have we gone?
You mean the entire economy?
Regarding the oil sector.
Regarding the oil sector.
Okay, the oil sector subsidy. The subsidy is still on. As a matter of fact, I don't have the figures handy, but the figure now said to be going into subsidy is humongous.
Well, that's for under recoveries. It's over $1 billion, I hear.
Okay.
Over $1 billion.
Okay.
A trillion
naira. You see that? Over $1 trillion naira going into subsidy. So when you look at it vis-a-vis what was going on that time, you now know that the best thing that ought to have been done, and even now, is to deregulate the market and let the forces of demand and supply, come into play. It's still not late now. It depends on how it is handled.
And how do you think that can be handled? Let's go to Dr. Abiodun Adedikwe.
Well, the way I will harmonize the two views expressed is, on the one hand, you need to allow what we call dynamic equilibrium. That means the market, the interplay of the market forces of demand and supply, fix the price on an ongoing basis, rather than what we call administrative fixing. That is where the issue is. Now, if you look at the pricing template of what you get at the pump head, there are a number of elements there that ordinarily, if the market was to determine the equilibrium price, wouldn't even be in the template to start with. Then there is this also, which I have personally argued against over many years, that NNPC is a public sector entity. And in terms of business, in economics, you say that, look, as much as possible, NNPC shouldn't be in the business of importing and selling fuel.
Right.
In fact, my perspective to it is very simple. If NNPC makes profit on which people, because that profit will be coming from people that buy its products.
That's you and I.
Exactly. So in which case, if you make profit at all, you are making profit from your owners, quote and unquote. So in my own view, that market needs to be restructured so that NNPC as a government, a public sector entity, is not even involved in importation of refined petroleum products, let alone marketing and selling them.
You know, interesting. So this happened 2012. We're still talking about it in 2019. But let's fast forward to 2014 when we rebased our economy and, you know, added other sectors. And all of a sudden we realized, oh, wait, we're the biggest economy in Africa.
Yeah.
And the question I want to put in to Mr. Irwan is, was that a blessing? Because, I mean, that realization, what did he do to us? Did he make us better or he pulled us back? Because I remember the Minister of Finance saying this is not a reason for us to go on a borrowing spree, but we'll get to that. But do you think that was a blessing for us?
No. It's just a proper reflection of what the size is. So you're determining what your size is, just like going on a scale and the scale was bad, you now have a new scale and you now know that I'm 70 kilograms or I'm 80 kilograms. It doesn't do anything. The reality is that when you want to look at that decade, you've got to say, rebasing the population, right? What was the income per capita? In that decade, Nigerians have gotten poorer every year because the income per capita has been declining. In other words, the GDP growth has been lower than the population growth rate, 1. 2, the potential GDP growth rate is higher than the real GDP growth rate, so we had a recessionary gap. So not only did we have a recession, but you still, as of today, you still have a recessionary gap, which means that you are likely, if anything happens, to fall back into recession if you do nothing structural. Thirdly, oil market volatility and external sector vulnerability was there. And fourthly, we had almost a fixed currency regime. So when you put all of these things together, you are taking your static equilibrium status, not only in petroleum products, also in electricity, and also in a foreign exchange market. And so, but the good news is that throughout that decade, our rate of interest on our treasury bills and others was higher than the rate of inflation. So there was a positive return. In other words, we had a positive inflation differential. Now, but these, in recent times, have changed. So we are reviewing the decade. If we want to talk about what the current situation is, it's a completely different story.
So is it like 2 steps forward and a few steps backward? Let me allow myself to come into that. Now, I mean, seeing the scenario here painted, our journey to this point. So how has it been for you? Is it like 10 steps forward, a few steps backward, or we're making progress?
That's talking about what specifically?
Well, the economy.
That's
I mean, it was
rebasing the
rebased,
economy.
we realized
the
we're the
rebased
biggest,
economy
and then
and
all of a
all
sudden we went into recession.
Okay, well, like he has said, it's a question of figures. You know, what the question about the Nigerian economy all this while is the increase in figures or coming out of the figure you are talking about, how does it affect the real human beings?
True.
You know, have your standard of living and well-being, you know, improved over this decade? You and I can say, to a large extent, no. If you talk about unemployment, for example, if you talk about continued or continuous population increase, you know, and maybe by next year when we have the visa on arrival policy, is it VIO or VIA? Okay, Vision.
It should be VOA.
Thank you, VOA. When we have VOA, you now have all kinds of people trooping into this economy, and it's likely to worsen the situation. All things being equal, I don't know. So you can now see that the so-called rebasing you're talking about, you know, has not improved anything.
So talking about worsening the situation, Mr. Marcel Okeke.
Yes.
Okay. Or let me go to Dr. Abiodun Adedipe. Mr. Marcel just talked about worsening the situation. The recession in 2016, could it have been avoidable?
Well, I will say that it was unavoidable. Okay. And this is the connection between that and the, you know, rebasing of the GDP.
Right.
Because there are predictions that it might even get worse.
You know, the way it goes is simply this. When you rebase, it's simply like a man took a picture 20 years ago, which was for Nigeria in 1990. And then we now came to 2010 and said, look, let's take a look at this economy. How does it look like today? 20 years after, we took a look at it, and we've been priming and also formulating policies, executing them, coming with programs, projects, all these years, without considering that things have changed. So by the time that was done for year 2010 as the new base, of course, the reality dawned on us. The one, the economy is bigger, but even more fundamental is the fact that its structure had changed significantly. Now, if you look at the pictures at 1990, telecoms was so tiny. When we look at the new structure when it was rebased, you are looking at the telecom structure, sector that was quite big. Now, not only that, we've also had this aberration in almost 5 decades, okay? And that is where there's a disconnect between the oil economy and non-oil economy.
Sure.
So where you find that, yes, you look at your GDP, various sectors contributing to it, but oil among those sectors, very tiny, less than 10% of your GDP. And yet, when you look at your foreign earnings, it is dominated by oil. So there's a disconnect, which we never corrected over these decades. And in particular, in the last 1 decade, we are just making effort now to change that structure and try to move the GDP in terms of structure to align with our foreign earnings. And of course, government revenue on the other hand as well. So for me, therefore, I don't see rebasing itself as a problem per se. It's about the management of the aftermath of that rebasing.
You know, you talked about revenue generation, which has been a major issue. And I would like to tie it back to what the former Minister of Finance said, right after the GDP was rebased, saying, hold up, this is not a time for us to go on a borrowing spree. But the story has changed right now. And, I know Mr. Bismarck-Rwani has spoken about this a couple of times. I mean, it's a worry for Nigerians. You see it on the headlines every other day. Nigeria is going to borrow money. People are worried. The government says, no, it's not a challenge. But listening to what the former minister said, I mean, should we have obeyed that directive, in quotes, a few years down the line?
I'm not sure. You see, it depends on what you're borrowing for. If you're borrowing project-specific, which will increase productivity, then the marginal revenue product of that economy will increase faster than the cost, right? And that's where you want to be. But if you are borrowing for consumption or borrowing for white elephant projects, then you won't have any impact.
So maybe that was what she was referring to there.
Well, I'm not sure. She just said no borrowing specifically. But, don't forget that we're coming out of the debt forgiveness, high peak activity. So one can understand the sentiment at that time. Please don't get us back into
So aren't we going back into that?
No, you're not. What you're trying to do now is to tie your borrowing. First of all, concessionary borrowing, which is low interest rates over a long period. Secondly, project specific, and then a higher level of accountability. But that does not mean that you should just borrow for the sake of borrowing. I think that's and people are so scared. They say, where I come from, they say if you have been bitten by a snake, when you see a piece of thread, you will jump.
You jump. Dr. Adriba, I think you can add to what Mr. Bismarck just said now.
In fact, everything he said there, I agree
I saw you counting, yes. I know you agree.
I think we all agreed on that note.
Yes, sure. Because no economist, let me say a serious professional economist will tell you not to borrow.
True.
The question will always be, what do you want to borrow for? So if they are project-specific, longer in tenure, that is concessionary, as Mr. Rwani said, and of course, cheap and affordable, then it means you can deliver a project that will enhance productivity, and that means also it helps to grow. In fact, we call them enablers. So if those things enable economic agents to produce more, that will deliver more value, your GDP will grow in the aftermath of that. But not only that, you also look back at the implication of your growth in GDP to jobs being created. That deals with the issue of unemployment. Of course, that affects disposable income. Sure. From there, it also, if you manage inflation very well, it also moves into real income.
Yes.
So you find that ultimately it affects the quality of life, if it is well managed, as was mentioned. So that's the critical issue.
So, Mr. Okeke, I see you agree on this. So I'm not going to ask you because 100% just aligned with them. But let's move to 2017 when Nigeria recovered from the recession. But this is 2019, and Mr. Rwani says there's even a possibility that we might fall back into that recession. Does that worry you, and how can we avert this, honestly?
Thank you for the question. Yes, we can avert that, and that is why the government has been coming up with a lot of policies and programs to make sure that we don't go back to, to recession. But when you also look at the major driver or determinant of whether we go into recession or not, which is oil and oil price, you find out that as we speak now, the price of oil is inching towards $70 per barrel.
It's doing better gradually.
Unexpectedly, yes. moving on so quickly. And there are so many internal and external factors that are driving that.
Or should we rely solely on that?
Hold on. My colleague here has mentioned that even here, we're now deliberately, effectively diversifying the economy.
Right.
Do you understand? So we no longer depend solely on oil, and that is ongoing. But I'm telling you, given our experience within the 1 decade you mentioned, that oil plays the critical role. And it was the collapse of the price of oil, essentially, among other things, that caused, the fall into recession in 2016 that you mentioned. So going forward, if the price of oil is doing well, added to these other, activities we are doing to diversify the economy, that means we are not likely to go back into recession.
So you think
You're not likely to go back.
Okay, I think he wants to come into that.
Economies are cyclical.
Okay.
Whether you like it or not, there'll be boom periods, there'll be slow periods, and then there'll be bust periods. So whether it's not whether you get into recession, it's when you will get back into recession, whether you like it or not.
Are you
Yes,
more about we.
Let's say
about
to discuss as if you can avoid a recession is not, that's intellectual dishonesty. The reality is that you will, when the time comes, you have to do things, and you've learned a lesson so that you reduce the impact of the shock. For example, in the last 11 years, we've had the longest expansion in economic history for a long time. After the global thing of 2008, crisis, yes. We are set. We are set for the next downturn. And everybody knows it. The only prayer is that Trump would like this thing to happen in 2021 before the election, but the chances are that it will happen in 2020.
So we
if
need
that
to brace
happens,
up.
of course, that's it, and that's what we're preparing for. And you have to have adjustments to your system rather than wishing it away. And those adjustments are either voluntary or involuntary. And I think Biola Adeduke will speak to that.
Perhaps one major thing also that ties into this is to talk about minimum wage. Improving how much workers earn. And today, 31st of December, is meant to be the deadline. For states to actually start paying. What role do you think this minimum wage increase, the whole consequential adjustment, will play in ensuring that people can brace up very well for what might come, as you have said?
Well, I happen to have been the chairman of the... No, the reality is that for 7 years, we're supposed to adjust every 5 years. For 7 or 8 years, we didn't adjust. Yep. The cumulative inflation for that 7-8 year period was significant. But what we adjusted at the bottom was 6%. So in fairness, the government got a good deal, right? Secondly, over and above those people who were in level 1 to 4, we had a flat adjustment, which we call the consequential cost. All told, the total impact of the payment, both at the federal, state, and private sector, did not come to more than, or will not come to more than maybe 2% of money supply, right? But at the same time, we increased the VAT. So what was put in was virtually sucked out, right? And other enablers to ensure that the economy was virtually in equilibrium so that we did not have overheated economy. In other words, if you put money into an economy without increasing productivity, you will have persistent inflation. Yeah. So I think we've more or less avoided, but there are things to come. There's the arrears. This thing was effective April 7th.
Right.
We are paying it now. So there's some arrears, and there's some other things that are happening at the same time. There's increase in money supply. There's a lower interest rates than the rate of inflation. There's a 7% negative rate. So there are some vulnerabilities and fiscal imbalances beginning to show up. And those things have to be managed at this time.
Now, talking about 36 states having to pay this minimum wage, do you think that some states will have serious challenges which might even end up hurting all of this minimum wage issue that has been implemented?
Two things. One, you either reduce your workforce, which nobody wants to do.
Nobody wants to do that.
Yeah, but
because we're trying to increase employment rates.
You can't have it both ways. So reduce your workforce or increase productivity. But productivity gains do not come that easily. Yeah. So it's all talk, but no action. The reality is that, so if we remove some of the constraints, like having investment in infrastructure, rail, roads, power sector and all of that, then you will find that whilst automation and others are displacing some people in some areas, we are beginning to engage them in building critical infrastructure. And that growth and productivity gains that come from that will help stabilize the economy. I'm optimistic that the better days are yet to come.
Mr. Marcelo, okay,
Yes.
you talking about Nigeria's budget now. The budget, Nigeria is back to the January-December budget. A lot of people actually happy about that. I don't know if you are. But will this make the implementation percentage increase now that Nigeria is back to the January-December budget style?
Thank you for that question. Yes, I believe every reasonable or responsible Nigerian will be happy. Because what we have been going through in the past 1 decade has been causing a lot of distortions, you know, and uncertainty to businesses and even private persons, in fact, all economic agents. But now that we know we are coming back into the cycle of January to December, it brings certainty, you know, to you yourself as a human being.
Sure.
You know, to every business that you now know you are. And so whatever is the content of the budget, you are now expecting that it will be implemented as, you know, put there in the budget. Do you understand? And so we believe that going forward, we are yet to move into 2020, but we believe that it will give rise, you know, to better implementation of the budget. You understand? You now have 12 full calendar months within 2020 to implement the budget, and it's taken off day one in the year. Do you understand?
Yeah.
More so with the Finance Act.
Finance bill, right?
Bill.
Well, bill,
Yeah.
but it's going to be an act.
Yeah.
And that will handle the revenue side, because the challenge the budgets normally have is that no money to fund it. So government is also tackling or trying to tackle the issue of funding. And my colleague here, Rewane, has mentioned it. And so these things will work together to ensure better implementation of the budget, all things being equal.
You know, I just want to bring this in, Dr. Adedipe. Some say that, I mean, the budget is for 12 months. So whether it starts January, ends December, it as well start July and end June. And, you know, so the question is, how will this really affect anything? Certainty, yes, but then still implementation. Because if it probably isn't implemented well, then, I mean, we'll have lost all the gains with this budget cycle.
Yeah, really, that has been the major challenge Nigeria has faced over the years, or let me say even decades. And even when we had a cycle of January to December, we still had the issue that most government budget implementation started in March, not even in January. And so when you do your own planning in the private sector, even though your plan is for the year, running from January to December, wherever your business has a coincidence or something to do with the public sector, you factor in an assumption that no cash outflows will come for the public sector until probably the 3rd or 4th month of the year. So now that is an area we need to look at critically and then ensure that actual implementation doesn't wait until toward the end of the first quarter or beginning of the second quarter. If it starts January, immediately after the holiday of tomorrow, 1st of January, then probably we get a greater mileage in terms of implementation.
Do you see that happening?
Maybe he'll answer that. When we return, you'll tell us, Dr.
We'll get your
Adedipe,
response to that.
if you will see that happening. But when we return in just a moment, we'll be talking more on the nation's economy for 1 decade. Stay with us. All right, welcome back. You are still watching the 2019 end of a decade, and we are still here. You can still send in your reactions, #Decade in Review. That is how you can join the conversation here. We still have our guests in the studio. Thank you very much, Mr. Rewane, Dr. Abiodun Adedipe, and Mr. Marcel Okeke. We just watched the border closure report there. A lot of people have been very disturbed since this border closure. Inflation has increased. What has the real advantage of this border closure been for Nigeria and the economy? Dr. Adedipe.
Well, for me, it shifted attention to 2 important things. One is this disconnect between what we consume and what we produce. So now we have to consume what we produce. That is on the one hand. And the second side to it is jobs. Because as you produce more for what you consume domestically, naturally you also need to employ more hands. Yes, temporarily, the price will go up because you can't produce enough to meet the demand that is ratcheted up by the closure of the border. It's normal in economics. So, but in the course of time, as the domestic producers also ramp up capacity, they will be able to produce enough to meet the domestic demand, and price will normalize.
Okay, Mr. Marcelo KK, what's the advantage you have seen from this border closure?
Well,
and disadvantages also.
Okay, well, on one hand, I think they are dealing with, the closure is dealing with illegal, importation, if you like. That's people who move across the border at will and bring in things anyhow, that are not recorded or captured in any way, including dangerous materials, even small arms and ammunition. They say they have checkmated those people. Okay, that's one side of it. The other one is that the closure, in terms of international relations, is perceived to be unilateral, meaning that Nigeria just woke up one day and closed their land borders. And so our neighboring countries around us are feeling, seriously hot by that unilateral action. And it's like either they are now taking some reprisal, if you like, action or retaliatory action. We hear in places like Ghana and some others, some irate mob going around trying to attack Nigerians and their businesses and all that. And just a few days ago, we're hearing that, the French-speaking countries, the Francophone, have come together to say that they are now adopting a currency that is called ECO, and leaving out the rest of, members of the sub-region. So all these things going on, could be a response to that unilateral closure of Nigeria's border. I don't know.
Right. So, Mr. Irwane, let's just try to project for the next decade. Now, this border closure, do you think it has a role to play in our plan for the next decade, perhaps, becoming, one of the major economies?
No, you can't.
Do you think this should be part of our
First and foremost, in economics, we do not always look forward to what we call a Robinson Crusoe economy. You can't have a closed-door economy, one. Two, Adam Smith, the father of economics, talked about the wealth of nations and the theory of comparative advantage. You cannot create your comparative advantage just by locking your doors. You've got to be competitive. It doesn't take long for anybody to imagine that after you close the borders, people will smuggle anyway, right? So what does smuggling mean? It means that you are equilibrating the price, the currency value, and the duty to bring. So you are just creating opportunities for regulatory arbitrage, and becomes more of a smuggler's paradise. The thing to do is to see those things where you have a competitive advantage, produce those things well, and you enjoy that. Then secondly, we have signed and about to ratify the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. There are so many benefits for the bigger country in regional integration. So I think the temporary short-term views are not going to get us anywhere. What we need to do is to make sure that we are competitive.
Just briefly, is this an advice you have given to the president as a member of the Economic Advisory Council?
We advise the president in camera, not on television. So the question is that if Dangote's refinery is going to be producing 500,000 barrels, we cannot consume all of that. We have to produce and sell that across West Africa and Africa. If we are producing this cement, our Nigerians are investing across the region. We are the beneficiaries of a bigger market, more than we being the victims of a bigger market.
So we should open up.
Absolutely.
We should open up. So we're looking at a better decade, definitely, I guess, with
That's a great place to leave it. We'd like to thank you so much, Mr. Bismarck Irwane. He is the CEO of Financial Derivatives. We'd like to thank you for your time. And Mr. Marcelo KK, former chief economist, Zenith Bank. Thank you for your thoughts. As well as Dr. Biodun Adedipe, who is an economist. Thank you, gentlemen, for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, from economy, we move to security. And that will be our focus in a couple of minutes.
Stay with us.